Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
You probably know by now we're watching Season 4, Episode 5, The Constant, known by some as the greatest episode of television in modern history.
We will be joined this week by both Henry Ian Cusick and Sonya Walger for an extensive discussion of the events of this episode.
That's right, Desmond and Penny together talking about The Constant 13 years later, 12 years later, I should say. It's quite wonderful.
Can't wait to share it with you. Let's go.
We're going to do something a little bit different this week. Usually Rosie and I will talk about the episode for a while and then play the interview that we've got. This week, we know you're really going to want to hear from Ian and Sonya, so we're going to quickly start with our hot takes about the episode, which is where we usually begin, and then we're going to get right into the big conversation. So, Rosie, what's your hot take about The Constant?
Yeah, so I remember this, as I think many, many people remember this, as kind of a beautiful romantic episode, and I always forget that it's very much a science fiction episode of television. I mean, every aspect of the plot here hinges on time travel and exploring in great detail kind of the consequences of time travel, specifically on Desmond and also kind of George Minkowski and also, Daniel Faraday's mouse. But they really get kind of down and dirty with the sci-fi, which I had forgotten about until we began discussing this episode here in season 4. Time travel is not just like a weird side plot. It is what our characters are experiencing and trying to figure out how to manage and navigate, and indeed they do.
Yeah, and we talk about this with Ian and Sonya in our conversation, but like really the science fiction here serves the the core love story with the two of them, which I think is why those two elements work so well together. They're not separate. They're very much intertwined.
Right.
Similarly, my hot take, I mean, it's right along those lines, which is that as great as the scene, between Desmond and Penny at the end, the phone call, which is, the classic scene with good reason, what gets overshadowed in this episode, I think, is the phone call between Desmond and Daniel Faraday, where Desmond is on the boat and Daniel is on the island, which I just think is, I mean, it's, similar structure of a scene, two people having this, phone call, Desmond's on the boat. I just think it's such a fast-moving, edge of your seat kind of thing where, Daniel asks him, what year do you think it is? And like, what do you mean, what year do I think it is? It's 1996. And Daniel's like, oh no, doing his mumbly thing, oh no. And he's running to his journal and, they're like, Daniel, what are you doing? And it's just, he tells him, you've got to find me. It's so incredible and so unexpected in how this scene plays out. And I love that, when he tells him you've got to set the device to the certain numbers, and how when he repeats himself and he says, you've got to tell me about Eloise, and then he repeats it again and gets cut off right in the middle of Eloise as Desmond cuts back. I mean, this is also a perfect scene, not to the levels of Desmond and Penny at the end, but this is also just a fucking amazing scene.
I agree with that entirely. This is such like an astounding flashback. And part of what makes it great, I think, is that Desmond is experiencing it alongside us. We're not seeing the sort of film reel of Desmond's past. Desmond is there with us and is equally confused by what is going on. But so when we see Desmond meet Daniel Faraday at Oxford, and we see, the mouse run the maze, and he hasn't taught her how to run it yet, so it's evidence that consciousness can travel back and forth, and we're learning all that for the first time, and no one's kept it a secret from us. It's.
I think you're right on the point of we're learning it and no one's keeping it a secret. That's to me. I mean, Lost so often. I mean, this is what was one of the things that was great about the show is it hides stuff from you. It forces you to wait and wait and wait and wonder and wonder and wonder. In this episode, we get Faraday, against Charlotte's better judgment at the beginning, saying, "Why don't we just tell them what's going on?" And he tells Desmond what's going on, and then in the flash, flash sideways, in Desmond's flashes, he, tells Desmond, here's what's going on with Eloise and with time travel, and here's what I think is happening to you. Like, he's really just spitting out answers.
Yeah.
It's great.
As best he can.
Right. Well, I mean, as best as anyone can, explain what's really going on here with the time-space continuum,
Right.
Faraday can do it.
Well, and also because Faraday is the only person who really understands the stakes, right? Because of the work he's done with Eloise and presumably, 8 years of research between then and now, he knows that Desmond is in grave danger. He knew that George Minkowski was in grave danger. And he needs to do everything he can to intervene in this moment.
So how about we put a pin in this and talk to Ian and Sonya and then come back to the sci-fi a little later?
Sounds good to me.
Let's get into the interview.
Do either of you remember how you felt when you first read this script?
Initial reactions.
Sonya, do you want to go first, or?
You go.
What did I initially think when I read the script? Well, of course, it was a Desmond-centric episode, so I was very excited about that because, you waited for, a big bite of the cherry, and it was a good episode. I remember reading it thinking, this is a good episode, and everyone came up to me and said, you've got a great episode, and I knew that Jack Bender was directing it, and he was very excited about it. He came and talked to me about all of his ideas, and I knew Carlton and Damon had spent like 2 weeks breaking it down. It was one of the longest ones that they broke down because there was so many sort of mind fucks. Oops, can I say? Anyway, I did.
You can say whatever you want. Mind fucks are good.
Anyway, so so they were excited by it. Yeah, and I remember just it was a while ago. Obviously, it was 12 years ago. But I remember being excited by it. I didn't realize that it would turn out as well as it did.
By the way, can you believe it's been 12 years? Does it feel like 12 years to you guys, or does it feel like this just happened still?
Feels like 12 years to me. I mean, I think when you get married and you have children in the interim, life feels so different. If anything, it feels like even more than 12 years, honestly.
Huh.
I watched it last night in preparation of...
Did you?
Interview, and it certainly feels like 12 years. Sonya, you look like a baby.
I don't. Oh my
You're like
God.
a baby. And there's a quality about it. It does feel 12, and it looks 12 years ago as well. So it does feel that way.
What do you mean it looks like it in terms of how you guys look, or just the film quality, or what do you mean?
The way it's shot, television has come a long way since in 12 years, I feel, what you look at, and the speed of it, for 44 minutes now, you jam so much into 44 minutes. And that one had a sort of a languid sort of pace to it. There were moments of it, it was fast and exciting, but it took its time. There were a lot of shots of a helicopter or a boat, a lot of setup shots, a lot of where nowadays it's like get on with story,
Right.
jam it. You jam an episode full of content.
Right.
Did you two... So I guess one question we have is, when you filmed this, obviously this episode totally hinges on the connection between your characters. Did you two know each other well at this point, or was it just sort of still a passing acquaintance from having shot a couple of episodes together, years previously?
God, I mean, how many episodes had we done by the time we did The Constant? You would know, you two. I have no idea.
I think it was 3.
Just a handful.
Yeah.
Right.
2 or
3,
3.
you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
So then the answer is going to be no, because, Ian was living in Hawaii, immersed in this whole other world. And I was just this intermittent guest star who would occasionally get a phone call going, you need to get on a plane and can you be there in 3 days' time? And I would go, oh, yeah, sure, that's right. I do Lost, right? Sure. And I would drop whatever I was doing. And quite often I was doing, as I think I've told you, another show or one point a play on Broadway, or I had my whole other life in LA, and then I would fly into Hawaii and have to sort of re-immerse very quickly in the world and the vocabulary and the sort of ecosystem, if you like, of this show that I was a part of, but without being a part of it in any practical sense. I think Ian and I just lucked out in that he's so easy to work with and so are lovely to get along with, and the fact that we're both, you know, he's Anglo-Peruvian and I'm Anglo-Argentine, or Scottish, forgive me, whatever. But you know,
there's no Anglo in me, young lady.
Sorry, you're right. I knew that was coming. But you know, and I think there was such a relief for both of us, or I'll speak for me, that here was this familiar person who had a sense of humour and ease, and we both had recognisable backstories in terms of where we came from back home, and a background in theatre, and just working actors, grateful for good work and someone easy to work with. I mean, I think that got me such a long way. It was always so lovely to see him, and so I felt like we picked up where we left off, however much time had elapsed between it.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you say. Also, there was a sense of like we were both like kind of slightly outsiders coming into this show, and I always felt that about this show.
Yeah.
That I turned up late. I wasn't part of the original plane that went down. Even I wasn't a part of. I was always my own entities, and I only really worked with Sonya and Alan Dale. I was always an outsider, really, with the group. I mean, I had the odd scene here and there, but my core acting partners, I always felt, were Sonya and Alan. So, and you know, as you say, you were so easy to get on with, and we sort of. My first scene in my first episodes were with you, so you were like, you know, I know you were always coming in, but I always thought of you as a regular,
right?
You know, and you look at this show and that episode, I think you flew in to do 2 or 3 days work on that episode, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the amount of scenes we have, then they're not that many in that episode. There's the phone call which we didn't even do together.
No,
it was we shot on separate days, and the only scene that we shot together was the pre-phone call when I come to the door and I say you have the phone. You know, the 2000. You know, I won't call for 14 years, but everything else was, you know. But I watched that scene again last night, and that really is, for me, watching it again, was the scene that sets up the phone call. Which, without that scene, the phone call doesn't work at all.
Doesn't work. Yeah, it's true.
It was a really good scene, actually, I thought.
Yeah.
You guys weren't together when you shot the phone call? You weren't really talking to each other or interacting with each other?
No.
Wow.
I did my lines with the script supervisor, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe even the first AD. I can't remember, actually.
Yeah.
I was there for Sonya's part, because Sonya flew in for that. Because Sonya, I think you flew in 2 or 3 days, I think, right?
Yeah, tops. I mean, I was never there for very long. I was only there in and out. You were there for my half, were you? Fuck,
yeah.
I don't remember that.
I was sitting on lying down on the sofa, and it just.
You mean when she was in her flab with the Christmas tree and everything, you were just there off to the side?
Camera. I was quite far off camera.
Yes, that was one of those surreal things where I flew, you know, all that way, all those hours to put on a cashmere polo neck and pretend it was London, 1993. That really was a stretch. I do remember being like, you kidding me? This is what this job is? This is so weird.
You would stay for a weekend, though. Where would you stay? The Kahala, that's right.
I stayed at the Kahala. They tried to make me stay somewhere else, and I was like, no. You keep driving to the nice hotel. I'm not staying at that Holiday Inn. That doesn't work. I'll be at the nice hotel. That's where you'll find me.
If you're going to come all that way, you might as well stay at the Kahala, you know.
I thought so.
Oh, jeez. So when I was just rewatching this episode a couple of nights ago, and I had forgotten how much of the time travel and the sci-fi stuff really makes this episode what it is. It's, you know, there's this weird logistics of what happens when Desmond's consciousness gets unstuck, and Faraday gives all these speeches about, you know, why you have to find a constant or you might die. I think oftentimes it's easy to see the sci-fi stuff as running counter to all of the emotional stuff, but I think in this episode it really comes together in a really interesting way. How do you think those things relate to each other?
Yeah, I think that it works well. The sort of manic, it kind of reminds me of Jacob's Ladder, this episode. And I thought Jack Bender did a great job of intercutting the present with the past, or the past with the future. You know, those moments of in and out of consciousness, which adds to Desmond's turmoil and his sort of insanity, or sort of where his mind is at, and that he gets more and more desperate. But that works really well. And then at the end, you just so want, when he says, because it follows very quickly, I'm not going to call, you just don't change your number. I won't call for 14 years, keep the same number. She's like, what? And then when I'm calling, oh, it's a London number. Oh, you know, it's some blah, 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 blah. And he comes up with a number, and he just remembers it. And she answers, you know, but all the manic, all the sort of intercutting leads to that moment. And it's a lovely moment. It really is. It's a romantic sci-fi standalone sort of episode. Yeah.
One of the things that's amazing to me about that scene where she gives you the number is I'm amazed that she actually gives you the number. I mean, Sonya, it's like this, he seems kind of crazy, right? He's not going to call you for 8 years, and he's, you know, broken up with you, and he's like, you can't change the number, you can't, like, what's going through, I mean, what's happening in your character's head there, do you think? Why does she really do it?
Oh, I think there's such an odd... There's an odd faith in Penny, always. There's just an odd belief, I think, that despite everything, despite it all, and also what's to lose? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's to lose by...
I watched that scene yesterday, Sonya, so I'm going to jump in here, because when the way you played it, what came across to me was that I had just broken up with you, or I had left and I joined the army. And... you give a pause and your eyes well up, and it's like you still love me, and you want to get back together, but you can't, and you don't give it over immediately. There's a long beat before you hand it over, and you want to see, and it's a lovely moment of like you can see that you still care for me, you love me, and then you give it over, and then I remember. I remember then I said, all that, you're not going to write it down. And then you just say, oh, just get out, because you're in, and I just feel like there's the moment you're going to come together, you're going to write it down, get the fuck out.
That is exactly what happens, yeah.
And but it works, you know. So, but I think that you see the moment of like, you still love him. So when the phone call happens, you go, you do love him, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's...
Yeah. It's such a leap of faith, that whole relationship. I mean, it isn't all love, but theirs more than any, I think, is so much a dive into the unknown based on a deep feeling that they have for each other that transcends the craziness of the circumstances they find themselves in. I mean, that's the enduring appeal of this couple, I think.
Yeah. I was just going to say, on the phone call, I mean, the emotions are so heightened for the whole episode, really, just because things are so crazy. But in the phone call, how do you as actors bring so much emotion to a moment like that when you're not even in the same room together, you know, and you're either doing these lines with with someone else on set? What, if you can remember being 12 years ago, what was that like?
I remember it precisely. It was, it was obviously I wasn't doing it with Sonya, and I was doing it with Scripty, and I didn't like the tone of Scripty's voice. And I believe I asked the first AD, who was male, to read it, and I just said, can you just read it slowly? And I remember it was the last shot of the day, and I only did it twice. And so there's always an element of good fortune about things like that, because last shot of the day, you can either just rush it and not get anything, but you've made your day. And I did it once, and it was all right. And I thought, this is it. I've got this. When sometimes you put the pressure on yourself, they say, this is probably my last take. I'll just go for it. And I went for it. And the gods were smiling, and it just worked out, well. And sometimes that just happens,
Yeah.
You can try and push, and when you push it never works. I think, that was probably a learning curve for me. I actually just let it go. Sometimes when you just let it go, when you go, let's see what happens, that's usually when it's the best. So let it go a little bit.
I think I just recently back then, I think, started working with this really interesting voice coach who did an enormous amount of breath work That was really what it was about. And I've always been really interested in, this is going to sound weird, but bringing your whole body to work so that you're not just a talking head, but that you have this integrated thing going on. Particularly because of years of doing theatre. I always feel it was always very palpable to me when you're watching a TV or movie actor on stage, not just because they're often very small in their work, but they're often not bringing their body in the way that a theatre actor, I find, like, inhabits a role, because you have to. And so I was just starting to work with this breath teacher, and so much of that, so much of what I learned from him was about letting go of the result, letting go of the need to cry or have a big emotional experience, and instead to work on opening your body up, so widening your rib cage and deepening your diaphragm, and having a body that was as supple enough that you could ask for any experience to come through it without it being this clenching thing. So I have a hazy memory, but I do hang on to this one. I think I did a really full body warm-up before that, the kind that I would ordinarily do before going on stage. And I think in a way it was quite helpful because I didn't really know the crew terribly well, and I didn't really have to like make chit-chat and small talk or befriend anybody because I didn't really have any friends. I knew Jack, and Jack was lovely, and Jack was enormously respectful, I think, of me arriving on set full, as if you like, not wanting to diminish where I was by chatting. So I do remember coming to that phone call feeling like a glass full of water, and that I was ready to turn the tap on. No, I don't mean waterworks. I mean, I just remember arriving feeling like, hopefully whatever I ask of myself now will arrive. I wish I did those warm-ups more. These days I feel rushed, and I'm usually rushing in and having dropped a kid at school and done all the rest of it. Those feels like a sort of luxury these days, but I have a memory of that.
When you talk about those warm-ups, is this like a physical, like an exercise?
It's a physical warm-up. It's probably no different to, or its fundaments are probably the same as yoga. I mean, it's largely just about sort of freeing your instrument, for lack of a better word, so that you're not just coming from the rigidity or the normal place that you ordinarily would have a conversation with someone else, but you're arriving in a way where you're much more available to whatever's going on.
Obviously, there's, besides the tremendous acting that you both do, which is really remarkable, what do you think it is about the scene with the phone call that this resonates so much with people, and still after so many years? I mean, I think it's a classic scene, not just of Lost, but in modern television. And so I'm interested what you guys think it is about this scene that gets people the way that it does.
You take it. I don't know.
I guess, it's the incredulity about it, to wait 8 years for a phone call. The audience are always rooting for this couple to get together. It's the distance, not through, just a physical distance, but also through, time, and I say, I will not call for 8 years. And then she answers, Penny answers and says, I know about the island. I've been looking for you for the past 3 years. So them coming together, I think the moment when I say, you answered, because I'm sure the audience is going, who's going to answer? Of course, And then I say, Penny, you answered. You still care about me. I think that moment is really quite big. And she says, yes. And then just the way it was cut at the end, I love you. I'll wait for you. I promise. And that all adds to it. The music as well, the way it swells. Michael Giacchino does a great job with the music. It's a very romantic, and you just think, it's just a very beautiful moment. it's kind of like, you know, a little bit of a magic in a bottle, you know, that scene, that whole moment, you know, it's that we pull it off, you know, so.
It is pretty amazing to be able to go from the scene 8 years ago, I'm going to call you in 8 years, and then immediately next scene, you get the results of that. That's something you really couldn't do in too many other TV shows.
Yeah.
And the audience are with it, you know. They're like, I'm sure, no way. Hey, who's going to... And she's got the same number.
Well, it's like, you know, Sonya, you said a few minutes ago about the leap of faith. I thought that was interesting because that's... I mean, that's true with Desmond and Penny, but that's also like one of the big themes of this TV show, right? That this is, I mean, you hear that phrase repeated again and again. I mean, Locke says to Jack at various points, you've got to take a leap of faith.
Yes, faith and science plays a big part in this show. You know, and it's not by accident, you know. I think Carlton is quite religious, and I'm not sure Damon is. But from my first introduction, it was always about... I'm going to push this button every 108 minutes. You know, that's just a leap of faith. Yeah, that theme's all the way through the show. Faith, science, love.
Yeah. And in this episode, you've obviously got, as we talked about, the strong dose of faith, but also the strong dose of science. And those two things kind of come together in a really interesting way. I mean, it's a unique... I feel like this episode, and this is just my theorizing, but it displays two of the things that are most special and unique about Lost, both of those qualities, in a way that ties the time travel and also the love story together really neatly. I don't know. Maybe.
That's a good hypothesis, I think. I think we've asked you both this separately, but since we're all here together, what is it? What is this sort of special magic that Desmond and Penny have? What is it that makes this love so enduring? 8 years without conversation, that Penny still have 5 years into that decided to go and pursue Desmond on this island, and 8 years later he calls. And what did you imagine was there between those characters?
Sonya, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't read too much into this, but she's called Penelope for a reason. I mean, you have to look to your archetypes a little bit, and I took that seriously. I think this idea that Penelope waited for Odysseus and waited and dissuaded other suitors and did everything she could to get rid of those suitors in order to wait for her derelict husband, who was gone far, far longer than Desmond was. And I think it's helpful, without getting too heady about it, but I think it's always helpful to have an archetype when you're working on a character, when you're working on something sustained for a while. It helps you, particularly when it's something that's intermittent and you're coming in and out of. It gives you something, a framework to sort of hang it from. Now then you particularize it and you make it specific, and you work with the script that you're given and you work with the actor that you're given. But to have that framework, I found tremendously helpful. It meant it gave it universality. It gave it that there's a historical precedent for this, for women waiting and believing and having faith and loving someone enough to endure and make sacrifices and pursue. I loved how active Penny is. It's rare to find female characters, unless they're villains, who are active. They are usually passive or accompaniments, or the girlfriend or whatever. And I loved how active Penny was in this love story.
I always thought of Desmond as an everyman character. And, this idea that love can conquer all, I think resonates with an audience, resonated with me. To go through everything he went through, to get back to his Penny. Penny was was Desmond's constant, and was, it was a very simple role in many ways to play. I just had one objective: to get back to Penny. And I meandered my way through the whole show, having to battle with Eloise Hawkins, having to battle with Alan, Penny's father, and my own, insecurities and fears as a character. But it was always getting back to Penny. That I think is a love story that people are rooting for. They just want to see them get back together. And come on, Desmond, you can do it. Don't stop, keep going. It's a very attractive quality in that steadfastness. In people to not waver, to stay true to their love. I think we all would aspire to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like you both just touched on, in sort of different ways, but the sort of universality and the simplicity of what each of them was trying to do, that they just wanted to be together and conquer all of these obstacles. But, there's something that I feel like it's something that everyone can identify with. Like, the dialogue at the end in the call when you're going back and forth, I'll find you, I promise, no matter what. I love you. It's just, I don't know, it's really, these are straightforward ideas, right? I mean, these are emotions that everyone kind of can be familiar with and recognize.
Despite the circumstances being absurd.
But I think that's part of the appeal of this couple, is there's, in the heart of a show that, God knows, was pretty Byzantine, and you could get desperately lost with smoke monsters and tracking whose was on whose side and what was happening at any given moment. I think to have a couple that had an absolutely, as you say, straightforward objective and a straight as an arrow love story just that is uncluttered by tears in the space-time continuum gave the show a little anchor. I mean, one of many. It was a tremendous show of tremendous performances. But I think the appeal of this couple is that there was something very uncluttered about what Penny and Desmond had with each other.
Do you remember at what point you realized that this episode was going to sort of go down as something special in the way that it has, and not just, like another great episode of Lost? Like, how did you realize that over time?
I only realized it whenever it got listed whenever that list came out and it was the top episode of television in the last decade.
That's right.
Yeah, I was like, what? Okay, lovely. Really? Delighted. That was literally it for me. I mean, I knew it was a beloved episode, but that was an eye-opener for me.
Yeah, filming it, we had no idea.
Yeah.
Even when it came out, it was well received, but I didn't know it would go down as the episode has gone down now. Sort of as Sonya's saying, you see a lot of people, putting it on their list as their favorite episode. And I don't know, Sonya, you must have people coming up to you and talking to you about the episode. I found that a lot of people would come up to me in the street or in the supermarket or whatever and say how much they love that moment, the phone call.
Yeah.
And they would always say, the phone call. Oh man, that phone call, so that's all they had to say. I think over time, people have let me know how much they loved it. But, at the time you don't know. You're just doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So did you get people who want to talk about it too, this episode?
Yes, I do. I mean, it's always humbling. It really is. I mean, as I say, Ian's right. I think we did both always feel like outsiders. I felt it more than 1,000 times more because I was genuinely a guest star on this show. I mean, technically, metaphorically, literally, I was a guest star who flew into Hawaii on a handful of occasions to participate in this show that didn't change my life in the way that it did the regulars who all moved and made these enormous seismic changes to their lives in order to pull this off. So it's been incremental with me over the years, honestly. It's felt like, oh wow, people are still talking about this lovely guest star that I used to nip off and go and do and grab a couple of extra days on the beach, and felt... I've felt more and more honoured to be a part of it as time has gone by, is the truth. I really have. I think at the time I just felt like, cool, great gig, nice people, I'll go do it, then I'll come back. I I did 2 seasons of an HBO show while this was going on. I did a play on Broadway while this was going on. Like, I had this whole other, not career, but like full other life that was going on. And so it felt like, Lost felt like this amazing condiment to the rest of my food. But it did not feel like what I was living off. It certainly wasn't what it was, certainly wasn't what was paying my bills. So it's an odd relationship to have had with it, where I increasingly am like, wow, what an amazing thing to have had this, frankly, incidental relationship with this show that has come to mean so much, and that to have participated in the episode that people nominate as the episode they remember most about it. I'm not being glib when I say I feel truly honoured that that's something that I'm a part of that. It bewilders me because I would never have predicted it. It wasn't something I foresaw at all.
It's funny to me because as a Lost fan at the time who was watching this, I can tell you I was one of, millions of people out there who were spending, months at a time wondering, where's Penny? When's Penny coming back? Like, she's out there somewhere searching for the island. What's going to happen?
Did they ever ask you, Sonya, to come back in a bigger role? Was there ever a conversation that said, would you be a regular? Nothing? Never?
No, nothing, never, no. They only ever... I never knew anything. I mean, I got the scripts when you got the scripts, or maybe a day later even than you. I had no idea when I was next coming back, if I was next coming back, when I was needed. I mean, I think it was one of the first conversations you and I would always have. I'd arrive and you'd come up to me and be like, how long are you here? Did you get the next episode? Do you know? And I'd be like, dude, no, you live here. Do you know? I don't know anything.
Yes, but they would have had to fly you, so they would have had to check your availability. So that's why you might have known more than me. Because we literally got them 2 days before. But you know what I mean? Sometimes they go, oh, they booked me. I know I have to keep these dates free. Sometimes as a recurring might know a little bit more about when I'm doing 5. Okay, you're doing 5? You're doing 3? How many? So I always...
Right. No, I don't remember getting having those kind of details at all.
Did you, Ian, you mentioned earlier, Damon and Carlton spending so much time on this script. Did you or did either of you ever actually talk to one of them about this episode or about what was going on here in The Constant?
I don't remember very few conversations with Damon and Carlton about the show. Only towards the end, maybe season 6, I said I need to have some. Usually we just made everything up ourselves. And this one wasn't a very difficult one in that sense. It was like doing a pin to play. You just thought, well, this is what I think it means. But you know what I mean? And which is a great thing to have in your arsenal to go, I'll figure it out. But Jack Bender was instrumental on how this episode went. He would talk to me often of, this is what he's going to do with the camera. And I learned a lot from Jack Bender. And then we're going to circle you, and at this point you're going to collapse, and I'm going to pick it up right here in a different set, so you remember exactly how you fell. The same movement, stuff like that. But it was fairly straightforward. I'm a big sci-fi fan, so I got my head around it, quite quickly. I just remember being this, the time travel thing. This for me is the best way you can do time travel in a conscious sort of setting, rather than a physical, like later on in the show they did the whole shaky movement, whoa, time travel. But this was, for me, this is the best way to time travel.
Yeah, the cuts are so interesting to me. It's just so you're lying there, you're falling, and then you're in that same position, and then quick cut, and your hair is cut short, and it's raining, and it's
and
quite.
Sometimes it's like
something.
mid-word.
Yes. It was written that way, so they knew exactly what they was doing. Actually, the rain helped a lot. I watched it again, as I said, and the rain, that whole it didn't have to be in the rain, but because it was in the rain, it just added a different dimension. And and I remember thinking, why are we doing this in the rain? This is just annoying. It's a beautiful sunny day in Hawaii. But I guess they were doing it for Scotland. But at the same time, it just gave it a bigger, an element to it that was a bit more frantic and uncomfortable and dramatic. It worked out really well. I really liked the rain.
Yeah. I really wanted to ask, and Sonya, I'm sorry, this is a question that doesn't have anything to do with your role in the episode, but Ian, I'm just sort of curious, working with Jeremy Davies, I personally, I love his work. I love the way he pauses for 10 seconds before he says anything while he moves his head around in his arms, and then he mumbles out something really quick. And anyway, just kind of curious what it was like to work with him, because he seems a little bit different in his approach.
I've never met anyone like him, and I probably never will again. But he was terrific. I watched it again. I keep saying. Anyway, he was great, and he is kind of unique in his method. But he'd always have his notes. He's always aiming to play something. He would always have his notes, and even though it looks like he's just sort of like forgetting, but it's all well worked out, and it worked a treat. But I thought he was great. I wouldn't want to ADR any of his stuff. Do you know what I mean? It would just be a nightmare.
Sorry, what is ADR?
When you have to loop something,
when you have to dub your own words.
You know, imagine his ADR sessions might last a long time.
You both have stayed friends since Lost ended, right? It seems like just talking to you both together, you're still great friends.
Yeah, so when we did a short film together. I reached out and we did a short film called Visible, and then Sonya came out to Hawaii. Oh, that's right. During the you bailed because the storm was
fucking evacuate. We evacuated.
Was that? I don't remember. Was that a hurricane or?
Yeah, it was a hurricane. It was a disaster. Yeah, we saw each other in Hawaii, and it was so lovely. And Ian's wife was doing a play in the church where Ian and I shoot where we'd shot. Yeah. So we had, it was so fun. We saw Addie's play, and we got to sort of hang out. And then you were flying back to do the 400, weren't you? You weren't there for terribly long, I think. You were. We only overlapped by a day or two.
When you left, though, because I was saying, this may or may not be anything, but you guys left. It turned out to be nothing.
It turned out to be nothing.
But it's always good to be prepared, just in case.
Well, when FEMA moves into Pearl Harbor, I take that as a cue to leave. I really do. Yeah, we were done.
Yeah, it's great that you guys have. I mean, I just as Lost fans, like, I just have to say, like, it's nice to see that if any of the actors on the show, if you want to know that they stayed friends and are like on good terms with each other, it's like you guys are a good two to pick. I think that's pretty pleasing.
Yeah.
All right, and we talked about this a bit earlier, but what are you both working on now, as much as you are able to be working?
Well, I owe 2 more episodes to season 2 of For All Mankind, so whenever that picks up, I will be back at Sony inside a spacesuit.
Have they been in touch with you? Have they talked to you?
No, they haven't. We haven't got a clue. Nothing.
So interesting how. So I've got 2 more episodes of MacGyver, and we shoot in Atlanta. And I did some ADR yesterday for it on Skype, and I just recorded it on my phone. I know, and I sent it through on the phone, and they said that was good enough. I'm going to do it. Because have you done all your ADR for your...
No, I haven't touched it. Not gone near it. I haven't done a single word of ADR yet.
Right, but you can wait. You're not airing for a while, right?
No, and it's Apple, and Apple have so it can go whenever, so I have no idea.
Because we're airing as right now. In fact, there's an episode on very soon, which I was going to go live to. Anyway, so so it's just crazy. I'm really interested. Anyway, speaking to one of the producers on that, and they said, "Oh, July," and I was like, "July? Really? We're going to go back to July?" Okay.
Nobody knows anything. Anyone who says they know anything, they don't know.
They don't know. Exactly.
It's comforting to me to know that network television, their sound solutions are the same as our no-budget podcast, which is just record yourself on your phone.
A voice memo and send it in, right? Totally.
They have a machine. They just put it through a machine, press a button, and press it.
Gosh. Before we let you go, anything else about The Constant that we haven't talked about that you think Lost fans should know, or recollections that come to mind about it? Anything that was on your mind that hasn't come up?
Just want to say I'm grateful for it. That it's very grateful for that I had that opportunity to do that episode. It's that it has a history, it has a legacy. I'll probably always be known for that, and I'll take it. But I'm thankful. I'm just thankful for working with Sonya and being involved in the show. But for that episode, it's very grateful for it.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you both so much for the time.
Not at all.
Nice to talk to you guys. Stay safe.
Man, that was such a great conversation. I love talking to them both so much.
I kind of can't believe that happened.
Yeah, we, by the way, if you're new to The Hatch and you just started recently, we've had them both on the show before separately.
Both in season 2, I believe.
That's right. We had Ian on at the beginning of the year and maybe briefly back at the end, and then Sonya in the finale of season 2, I think, where she appears. And they're both so lovely and so eloquent, and so it was a pleasure to have them both back with us.
So I absolutely love the way Sonya described what she calls a straight as an arrow love story that was sort of uncluttered by tears in the space-time continuum, which, like, that's just an astounding way to describe this, you know, this love story that takes place amid this wild science fiction backdrop, as we were talking about at the top of the episode. You know, it's actually the tears in the space-time continuum that clear the way for all of this, right? And that do bring it that sort of clarity of purpose. Because, you know, in Desmond's other flashbacks where we see his relationship with Penny, you know, prior to 1996, it does feel very cluttered, I think. You know, he's constantly trying to impress or trying to live up to what Charles Widmore thinks he ought to be.
Or running away because of what's happening in his own psychology because of that, joining the army, going on this boat race, all of these things that are, you know, interfering.
Yeah, and I think clutter is a really nice word for that. And it is this, I mean, it's the fact of his consciousness traveling through time that allows them to kind of unclutter that.
Right, which is surprising because you would think that would be the ultimate cluttering effect. But
Indeed.
She's right. The simple fact of their love for each other and how much they still want to be together despite all of this. I mean, I think she used the word transcendent at one point in this conversation. It totally transcends all of the clutter in this episode, especially in a really, really moving way.
Yeah.
I think for me, the one thing that I want to pull out of it, not that every moment of that interview wasn't, you know, splendid and worthy of discussion, but just hearing about the craft and how they filmed, especially the phone call scene, to know that, I mean, one, it blew my mind that they, you know, weren't actually talking to each other on the phone, that, you know, Desmond was working with, like, the assistant director or whatever it was to read the lines, and that, you know, Sonya was, you know, he was there in the flat with her, like, sitting on the couch, but not actually reading the lines with her. And to hear, you know, how she was able to, she described herself as a full glass of water going into that scene with, you know, the exercises that she had done and the breathing and the full body stuff, like, and that Desmond didn't like the first person who was reading the lines with him, you know, when he did it and asked someone else to do it. It's so fascinating to me to know how a scene like that comes together and to know that it's truly nothing like what I would have expected. Nothing at all. We have another conversation coming up later this season that, you know, we've previewed, you know, we've mentioned before. We have Michael Emerson coming back on the podcast for the second time as well. And we talked to him about that remarkable conversation that he has with Kevin Durand playing Martin Keamy. Actually, we have Kevin Durand coming on soon as well. We got a great lineup this year. But in that scene, you know, they told us they were actually talking to each other on those walkie-talkies, which is really what I would have expected here with Ian and Sonya, knowing how emotional and, you know, heavy this scene was. And the fact that they were able to pull that off despite the fact that wasn't the case is, like, mind-blowing to me.
I agree.
So like you said earlier, besides the, you know, the love story here, there's a lot going on with the sci-fi and the time travel and our friend Mr. Faraday. Where would you like to begin with this stuff?
I do just want to, of course, what would it be an episode of The Hatch if we didn't give a shout out to our friend Saeed?
Fixing the equipment. He knows how to do anything.
On the freighter, like, has clearly no clue what's going on, but just rolls with it. And does, like, kind of keeps Desmond together. So thankfully Saeed was there.
He even says something to that effect of, like, after he's fixed the communications equipment, he's like, at some point, someone's going to have to tell me what's going on here.
Yep. Oh, geez. Yeah, so Faraday is so funny because when he tries to explain things to the lay people around him, he has this wonderful way of saying it in a way that is, simple and accurate, but also incredibly mysterious, right? So he says to Jack on the beach,
your perception of how long your friends have been gone, it's not necessarily how long they've actually been gone.
And Jack is like, what in the world is this guy saying? And that is
Accurate.
that is what he means. But I think he's trying to describe this without saying something that's going to make everyone dismiss him as completely crazy, for lack of a better word, right? Like if he just showed up and said like, well, you see, the island is unstuck in time, that might be a little too much information right away.
I think that and this is probably the way that Jeremy Davies is playing it, but I just feel like there's this constant frustration within him that either the concepts are so complicated that he knows there's no way to make normal people understand them, or that he himself doesn't have the eloquence and the ability to make them into something that is both simple and also true. Like he just seems like he's constantly with those long pauses and the stuttering. It seems like he's trying really, really hard. He wants to make it easy for people, but he just knows it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and it is, it's not that people have to understand it necessarily. It's like they have to be willing to believe that it's possible.
Right.
And that's such a leap, I think. And understandably so. I mean, what he's proposing is the stuff of science fiction. And he just doesn't believe that people are going to believe him, I think.
Well, you say the word it's a leap. Maybe this is what, one of the things that connects the romance and the sci-fi of this episode, but that's what Sonya was saying about, what makes the Desmond and Penny love story so great, that from, Penny's perspective, it's such a leap of faith to continue believing in them after, all of the times Desmond has backed out and run away, and to keep, sort of going back to the well and believing that this is true. It's the same thing that Faraday asks. I mean, it's not the same thing, but there are lots of leaps of faith happening, even on the scientific stuff. Because I mean, it's sci-fi, but it's also it's almost like magic. It's it's a point where if it was truly pure, straightforward science, I think Faraday would be able to explain it in a way that was if not easy, then ultimately straightforward. But it's not. I mean, there's an element of something supernatural here, even if it's cloaked in science. And I think that's why it's a leap of faith for these people, because they just have to. At the end of the day, you have to just believe in what he's saying. He's not going to be able to prove it to you. There's an element of belief even in the science fiction.
Right.
By the way, that weird radiation light that Faraday shines on Eloise, the mouse, or the rat, I have to say it looks ridiculous. I mean, it looks... It reminded me of the light coming from the heart of the island at the end of the show. Anytime they needed to do supernatural special effects, except for the monster. I mean, the monster looks fabulous, but they have all these other examples where it's kind of lame look. It doesn't diminish the episode. Just had to be fully honest here. Anyway.
Oh dear. Yeah, you mentioned that you have a hindsight.
I do have a hindsight. That's right. I thought that this. I was thinking about season 5 when we were watching this, and this concept of whatever happened. I just thought that this whole thing where Daniel tells Desmond to tell him how to set the device in the past, which sets him on this course where he starts to understand these time travel dynamics, is such a great example of this whatever happened principle. That this is how it always happened. The way that Daniel got to where he was, where he was doing his time travel experiments and ultimately made it to the island and understood this stuff and had these things written in his notebook, was always because in 1996 Desmond came to him with information that he had given Desmond. I feel like that does hold up within... I mean, and then in season 5, there's an episode titled Whatever Happened, and the whole second half of the season, ultimately depends on that time travel idea with the going off and the setting off the bomb, and it doesn't work, and it ultimately causes the incident rather than preventing it. I feel like this is our first example and a great example of that idea at work and how Lost is going to handle time travel, which is to say really well. I mean, I'm glad that this is the route they go.
Yeah. I had a similar thought, which is... Faraday, at one point late in this episode, says kind of conclusively,
So,
This is changing the future.
You can't change the future.
You can go back to the past and, set events in motion.
But it always happened that way. That's how it always happened.
And the incident was always
a result of Jack and Juliet and Sawyer trying to set off that hydrogen bomb.
Yeah.
That's what happened. And I mean, and it's so tragic with Faraday. I mean, this is hindsight as well. Like he says to Desmond, as you said, you can't change the future. And ultimately that is his downfall when he decides back in the 70s and returns to the island and says, no, actually, I've spent all of this time thinking about the constants, but I forgot about the variables, people.
Right.
We react, we can change things, we have free will. I'm going to set off a hydrogen bomb. And tragically, he, ends up just putting the past as it happened in motion and leading to all the things that he doesn't want to happen. But that all of the groundwork for that is laid right here. This is like, Lost is telling us this is how time travel is going to work on this show, and it holds up.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can I share one more thought on that topic, actually? This goes back to Desmond and Penny. It was just one thing I was thinking as I was, re-listening to the conversation we have with them, and they were talking about how they, were fated to be together. It really, when you look back at the events that brought them to the moments of this episode, it really does feel like star-crossed. Like, I was thinking about how in the season 2 finale, it's the act of Desmond turning the key and setting off that anomaly that allows Penny to find the island so that she can, try to contact him. And then that leads us to the end of season 3, where it's Desmond and Charlie going down to the looking glass and turning off the jamming equipment that allows them to make contact with Penny for the first time and for that call to go through and set season 4 in motion. And then now as she continues to try to make that call, here on the boat in Minkowski, that scene where he says Penny's been trying to call us constantly, it plays out so slowly that you almost don't see it as one, continuous storyline. But there's been this storyline playing out since, season 2 and really, before that of, Penny in the background trying to find Desmond and Desmond doing these things that are inadvertently helping her find him.
Right.
And it then culminates...
That lead her to him effectively.
Right, and that ultimately lead to this, beautiful phone call. Like, it's not just the crazy events of this episode that set up this phone call and that scene between the two of them at her flat in 1996. Like, it's the events of several years and several seasons that have slowly, imperceptibly almost built to this moment.
Yeah, and it's really hard to see until you have all the pieces.
Yeah.
I don't think the first time I watched The Constant, a light bulb went off and I said, oh, when Desmond turned the key, that's what
No, of course not.
I don't know that you can see that until the end when you have the whole picture, but it does work remarkably.
Yeah, and that moment where, I think the moment where it all starts to come together is the moment where Faraday is telling, Desmond that he needs a constant in 96, and Desmond kind of has this little smile on his face, and he says, this constant, can it be a person? And then it's like, oh, okay, like, now we know where this is going and what everything has been leading to. It's finding Penny. Mm-hmm. And it's so beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And this week we received a hot take from a listener who also loves this episode.
Hey, Sammy and Rosie. I know that this week is going to be a long one with a lot of people talking about The Constant, but I just have a quick little personal story that goes along with this episode. It really did resonate with me, like it did for many others so far way back when, that I actually got a tattoo that says "My Constant" on the side of my arm, because the concept of this whole episode and the concept of a constant really stuck with me. And it's one of those episodes that I feel like you can kind of just pick up and watch no matter if you've seen the show before or not, and you can already feel emotion. Granted, you got to watch the show to have that, love for Desmond and Penny to finally be able to reunite and talk. But I just wanted to also leave you guys with, I met Sonya at a coffee shop in Malibu, my local coffee shop. And I've seen her a few times before, and I never really get starstruck. But because The Constant and Lost has meant so much to me, seeing her in person was just something that I wasn't really prepared for. And it was quite an honor to meet her. Thank you guys, and keep up the amazing work with the Hatch.
Man, I hate to leave this episode, but I guess it's time. I guess we've done it.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I'm not sure we'd be adding anything new, so...
Yeah, you all know why The Constant is what it is. We will, of course, be back next Tuesday. We will be watching Season 4, Episode 6, The Other Woman.
We will hear the second part of our interview with Roland Sanchez, costume designer, who we first heard from last week.
And the week after that, with the episode Ji-yeon, we're going to have Kevin Durand on, who, as mentioned earlier, plays Martin Kimi, and his character will be starting to heat up around then, so you'll want to stick around for that.
As always, we love talking with you throughout the week. We are at facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast, on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast.
And we always ask this, but truly, if you enjoy The Hatch, and we hope you do, please rate us on Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher, or Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you're feeling especially generous, maybe write us a review.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
We'll see you next week.
Namaste.